Hello, and welcome to the ManageIQ Sprint 190 review. The sprint ended June 27th and was a normal 2-week sprint. As always, I'll start with the overview, followed by Jeffrey on the UI, Adam on providers, Joe on platform and developer, and Keenan finishing up with the API. On the statistics side, this past sprint was very similar to the sprint before it. There were 60 PRs merged, with 85 open, and the breakdown was mostly on the bug side. We've been doing a lot of stabilization and trying to make sure everything's clean for a Najdorf release. And over to you, Jeffrey, for the UI.
Hi, good morning. In this sprint, 13 PRs got merged into the UI Classic repo, out of which 9 are bugs, 2 technical depths, and 2 others. I can explain them in the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. In this PR, in the add new flavor form, when the provider select box was changed, the selected object was passed down to the API, and only the selected value was expected. Hence, it was throwing an alert 500 error. Gilbert fixes by adding a simple value true property to its DDF select component and its schema. Next slide. An undefined method alert was being displayed when trying to add a new dashboard. This was handled by adding an L check for the variable that holds the dashboard list. And some unused methods are also removed, and a typo related for the no records found component was identified and hence corrected in another view. Next slide. The remove button in the dual select list component was enabled even when the right side of the list was empty. So in order to fix this, Gilbert upgraded the DDF version to 3.18.2. Next slide. Gilbert fixed the missing translation issue for the title and breadcrumbs, which comes under storage resources, host initiated groups, and physical storages. Next slide. This PR is related to an issue reported for the Red Hat virtualization provider validations. Gilbert applied some optional validations to the tabs for the Metris and RSA key pair tabs, but this was later reverted in a different PR by Adam for this logic to be handled in the override provider plugin itself. Next slide, please. Some element from the adding editing forms of service catalog items page was overlapping with the notification list. Small CSS change fixed this issue. Next slide. We have 2 technical depths and 1 security fix. First one, previously Uglify was eager loaded to provide custom configurations. Once the custom configurations was verified as no longer needed, Joe removed the configurations from the classic engine RB file. And Gilbert removed old Angular codes used to zoom in on the charts. And this was removed because all widget wrappers were already converted to React components. And we upgraded the version of the charts from 0.54.12 to 0.58.0 to fix a security vulnerability issue. Thank you. That's all for the UI updates. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So for core of this sprint, Keenan added a virtual attribute for the supports cloud database create to unlock some of the UI work to be able to support UI for creating, editing, and deleting cloud databases. Tony implemented the physical storage system validation, which allows the user to test credentials and endpoints for physical storages before going to add them. And Joe added a change to delay load the Intersight client to save time and memory. The Intersight client is one of the OpenSDK generated gems, and it uses a ridiculous amount of memory and added about 5 seconds to the startup time to load. So just delaying this until it's used allows the hit to be only incurred by the provider workers that actually need the gem. Next slide. A lot of work on Power VS this sprint. Let's see, Hero added an HTML5 console support for Power VS VM so that you can actually see the VM console with no VNC. He also added a native console option to the VM dashboard. This is a little confusing because VMs also have native console to view the actual VM console. So we're going to be renaming this in the future, but this is essentially opening the VM dashboard on cloud.ibm.com so you can view the details page for the VM. John, who's a new intern, added Cloud Volume clone support for Power VS, so you can clone Cloud Volume over to a new one. He also fixed missing params for attach, which was causing the Cloud Volume attach form to fail. And so those are two of his first large features that he added, which is great. For Power HMC, Vincent fixed a refresh failure if a VM or a template has no OS info, which is possible if you don't add any details in the OpenStack provisioning form on the HMC console. So previously that was going to cause a refresh failure. So now he's handling that and we're just skipping that part. For Power VC, Melody fixed some missing string translations when adding a Power VC provider. Next slide. For OpenStack this sprint, we moved the event catcher check to see if it should start up into a mixin. Previously, it was essentially copy and pasted into all of the OpenStack event catcher types for each of the child managers. So it just removed some duplication there and also allowed us to add this in an easier way for some of the child providers, which we'll cover later. For Oracle Cloud, we fixed a bug on Morphe where a private method was being called when the event catcher was starting up, so that the events were failing for the Oracle Cloud provider, so that we got that fixed up. For Over, as Jeffrey mentioned earlier, we fixed, between Gilbert and myself, we fixed the metrics key pair endpoint form validations so that now you can enter only the default credentials and still validate and add the provider. We also fixed the network manager event catcher. It was spinning on a failure since it wasn't checking to see if the service was available. So we fixed that by adding the previously mentioned OpenStack check to check that the service is available before actually starting the worker up. And that is all for providers. Over to Joe.
Okay, so for enhancements, Keenan made some changes for Ruby 3 support to ensure that some of the implicit hashes and keyword arguments are made explicit. I tested and confirmed we only needed Node.js at build time and not at runtime, since we compile assets at build time. Along with the Uglifier PR that Jeffrey spoke about in the UI, these additional PRs remove Node.js for runtime usage in production mode. Next, Jason added more build manifests for dependencies that aren't plugins, such as the appliance, RPM build, and UI service repositories. Keenan refactored a common pattern we use for logging a warning when a feature is not supported. And finally, I changed how the rake tasks are called from rake locale update all and how it generates the PO and POT translation files. Instead of needlessly creating many extra Rails processes, we now invoke the tasks in the same process and reset tasks in between so that we can evaluate them again, since the default rake behavior is not to reevaluate a task that has already run. And this is now nearly 4 times faster. Next slide, please. For bugs, Keenan fixed some virtual attributes to be used in views. He did some last sprint, and this one fixed a few more, and he added some tests. Next, I updated the translations for a fix for the JavaScript parser that we talked about last sprint. And this one fixed these extracting the strings that were lost due to that bug. And finally, due to a breaking PG error change in the PG gem, they changed the interface to that class. I manually locked down the version of the gem until the new release came out 1.4.1. And then for backport, we were pretty lenient and allowed anything except the broken 1.4.0. And on master, so that was for backport. And then on master, we're allowing anything greater than or equal to 1.4.1. Next slide, please. For developer, Adam added a JavaScript option to the plugin generator to normalize things common to the JavaScript plugins, such as git ignores and dependency versioning information. And Jason disabled a style cop that was needlessly opinionated about methods or variables containing numbers. Okay, and on to Keenan for the rest.
Cool. So on our side, these basically were enhancements to help us with other areas. Tony added some validation around storage so that the UI would have a better user experience when invalid credentials were entered. And then cloud volume to get the clone work. The clone clones cloud volumes by the Seashore by John, and that will help us with the clone. That's all for the API.
All right, so that's that brings us to the end of our sprint review. Next sprint review is sprint 191, which will be on July 13th at 9:30 a.m. at the same place. And I'd like to thank everyone in the community for all their contributions. Thank all our presenters today. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.